Hello, my name is Rinon, and in my last video I talked in depth about Endwalker Scholar, weighing up the job's pros and cons and how the new changes are going to affect it. Today I want to talk more about my favourite job in Final Fantasy XIV, but this conversation is going to be a little bit different. For those of you that tune into my stream, you likely know that I have some fairly outspoken opinions on the way Scholar currently plays, and that in my opinion it isn't necessarily in the best spot in terms of playability. I think there are a lot of dissonant components of current Scholar job design, both through a mixture of leftover remnants from the Summoner Tether, all the way through to the additions that take place each expansion without necessarily accounting for previously existing abilities. While it's a strong job that at its core is still very fun and it's still very good, sometimes you feel like you're fighting against the system to get it to play cohesively, and I also think that was one of the big problems with Summoner as well, and that's received a rework this expansion. So today, I wanted to do a little fun thought experiment with you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to propose small reworks to the Scholar job design and change parts of the way the job operates to bring it more in line with a book mage that I would love to play personally. I'm not going to completely rework the job from the ground up. There's going to be no brand new abilities for me. It's only going to be reworks of current skills, and I'm also not going to go into the nitty-gritty when it comes to things like potencies and damage balance. If you're interested in this kind of content, please leave a like, because this is something new for me. I've never done something like this before. I'd love to experiment with stuff like this more often. It sounds fun, sounds good. I also want to hear from you, so tell me in the comment section what changes you would make to Scholar if you had the chance to make it into your perfect job. So right now, Scholar has two main issues in my opinion, and these two issues are what we're going to fix. Firstly, it is the only shield healer, and well, honestly the only healer in general, with an inherent damage cost to the majority of its off-global healing. I think this is actually counteractive to the entire point of off-global healing, which is intended to reward good timing and playing your rotation efficiently. You're supposed to be rewarded with a free heal by using the timing effectively, right? I also believe that Scholar's ideal archetype, rather than the shield healer or the pet healer, is actually the instant using healer that has access to fairies. Scholar has always been monumentally strong when it came to their off-global abilities, and I think that's something I'd like to focus on. That's the job fantasy we're going to aim to fulfill. That leads us into the second issue. For a job that has numerous fairy abilities and a large majority of its healing being derived from them, all of the pet stuff doesn't really work well, does it? It's like some weird Frankenstein's monster of a system that's just really awkward to deal with. Seraph locks you out of Fey Union and Fey Blessing. Dissipation locks you out of everything, and the fairy needs to be replaced after every single alternative summon, and it's all a big mess. We're going to aim to fix that too. So here are the ground rules. I'm not allowed to add any new skills, and I'm also not allowed to remove any skills. We just have to work with what we're given. Just as a note, try not to take this too seriously, because I'm not. This is just some fun, okay? So we're hoping to fix both of the aforementioned points, and in doing so give Scholar a clear, firm identity and a fun playstyle. Fairy gauge is up first. So right now in Endwalker, there is only one use for the fairy gauge, and that is to use Fey Union. I hate job gauges that do almost nothing. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. What I would do in this case is change it from being used only for Fey Union to actually being used for all Aether Flow healing as well. Suddenly Scholar changes drastically as a healer, into one who gains these stacks over time naturally and can unleash them into multiple massive burst heals as required, and this strengthens its capability when you plan well even more, and it also immediately unlinks the job's core healing mechanic from its core damaging mechanic. Instead of being generated through using Aether Flow, it's instead generated over time, either once per 20 or once per 30 seconds. I'm honestly easy either way. I think in terms of balance perspective, you'd probably want it at per 30 seconds. Fairy gauge is also capped at 50 now, not 100. Aether Flow gives 3 stacks still, but instead of being linked to both healing and DPS, Aether Flow is now exclusively linked to Scholar's damage and mana economy. As a result, essentially Aether Flow is used every minute to keep your mana economy healthy, and you have 3 DPS off global abilities to use every minute with the goal of hitting them under raid buffs as your burst. whilst we aren't implementing additional abilities here, I also kind of like the idea of having an ability that eats 2 stacks at once for some kind of stronger skill, or even a re-implementation of Miasma 2, which would possibly give you some kind of interesting optimization options with each and every dissipation cycle. In my opinion, this is the first major step in terms of making Scholar more cohesive and comparable to other healers next expansion. Right now its healing and damage are intrinsically linked, and whilst that may sound good on a surface level, it's actually bad, because using most of your robust healing selection directly costs you damage, referring specifically to Aether Flow heals like Excog, Indom and Sacred Soil. This is especially true when you compare the fact that the other raid DPS centric healer, which is Astro, has so many free off-global options and very few options that actually operate at a damage loss. I can only really think of Neutral Sect, and you wouldn't use that unless you had to GCD heal anyway. So now, the Fairy Gauge and the Aether Flow are the 2 separate job mechanics that build and are spent independently, and all of the other job mechanics will feed directly into these. Lustrate, Excog, Soil and Indom now all use Fairy Gauge to execute. They can keep their current cooldowns however. Because Aether Pact would be pretty underpowered if it retained its 10 cost against these abilities, using Aether Pact once will give you say 3 to 5 healing ticks of the Fairy Tether. It becomes a solo regen alternative for Scholar. Recitation gets nerfed. It no longer gives you the free heal, instead just ensuring a crit of the next healing ability. Dissipation changes in effect in order to fall in line with the new Fairy Gauge and Aether Flow adjustments. Instead of eating your fairy, the fairy does not disappear, the fairy will instead Aether Pact directly with you and tether you and become unusable for 30 seconds, which solves the resummoning issue. It still gives you 3 Aether Flow stacks and a healing buff, but it now also directly gives you 20 Fairy Gauge. This means that for every 3 minutes, a Scholar receives 80 Fairy Gauge. That equals out to 8 free Aether Flow or Aether Pact heals. For balance purposes, you may want to consider giving Whispering Dawn and Fey Illumination a gauge cost as well, but you'd need to compare the free healing potency the other healers get in comparison. I'm not going to go into numbers today, so I'm not going to figure that out, honestly. It's definitely up for discussion, but like I mentioned a little earlier in the video, this isn't really about balancing, but instead having fun with design. Summon Seraph works the way it is now, but you are not locked out of any fairy action under Seraph's effect. You can even dissipate a Seraph if you want to, live your dreams, I don't mind. You can Fey Union under Seraph as well. All Seraph does in practice is give you access to Consolation and make the fairy auto heals provide a shield. How does the new Consolation work, you may ask? Well, it has a 0 cooldown and it costs 10 Fairy Gauge to use. This makes Seraph a really potent burst mitigation phase if you need it. If you align the stars correctly so that you can use 5 consolations within a single window, which gives Scholar something to compete with the utterly incredible Panheima. I actually said it right this time, amazing, right? On that note, remember when they mentioned they'd like to give all healer AoE abilities a special secondary effect? Now White Mage has Stun. Give Scholar a 5-second 2-tick regen under its AoE, give Sage a slow, and give Astro a 5-second damage mitigation effect under its AoE. Easy peasy, right? So on the whole, the new gameplay style of Scholar is that you have a job with a ton of off-global abilities, including 3 DPS off-globals that you need to fit in every minute. You manage your Fairy Gauge for healing, and Scholar maintains its place as the powerful off-global healer more than ever, and you maintain your Aether Flow for mana economy and DPS. It strengthens what the job is already good at and fixes some of the dissonant fairy jank while also not making it too strong, hopefully, to automatically win in comparison to Sage. DPS wise, Scholar receives no buff, it's exactly where it is right now, and aside from the massive cost of 5 consolation, it isn't quite capable of dealing with Sage's persistent, weaker mitigation and healing, and is instead still excellent at shielding big hits and burst healing targets. So that's what half an hour of rapidly writing random Scholar notes and piecing them together worked out for me. What do you think of it? Are there any elements from this alternative universe Scholar build that you'd like to see implemented in your Scholar? Do you have any ideas that can further improve or enhance my ideas? Or do you have a completely different ideal Scholar that you'd like to see in the game? Let me know in the comments section, I'd really love to hear from you on this. I'm very interested to hear your opinions. Next week, I'm going to be breaking down the other healers from the Endwalker Mediator build in depth, so please look forward to it. I also stream 5 days a week on Twitch, and we're doing Viewer Uwu in the very near future, so if you're interested, please check it out. Thank you very much for watching, and have an absolutely wonderful day.